Okay, so over the years, I've used or tried at least every type of bank account there is pretty much. Talking about American Express, Bank of America, Capital One, Chase, all of them. At PNC, American Savings Bank, Hawaii, for different reasons, primarily because of the sign-up bonus. Sometimes when you put a direct deposit on a checking account, you get a $500 bonus, things like that. But today I want to talk to you guys about why Capital One is actually the only bank account I actually use, and the one that I use for pretty much paying all my credit cards, which I have from all those issuers I just mentioned. I've been now with Capital One for probably almost like 10 years, and this is not a sponsored video or an ad or anything, but I really just wanted to share with you guys my actual thoughts on why Capital One is the only bank account that I consider using for a number of reasons that I think make it a no-brainer, honestly. If I were to just get one bank account today, like what actually makes sense. I realize in this channel we mostly talk about kind of credit cards and credit spending, but I think fundamentally the bank account or underlying account you use to pay off those credit cards is sometimes even more important. So the number one thing is that there are no fees whatsoever with Capital One. So I use the 360 products. So that's a 360 checking, the 360 savings, performance savings, and it's pretty great because there are no fees, no minimums required in your account to just have it open, right? So with Chase, for example, you have to have $1,500 in your checking account or you get a $12 monthly fee. That was something I didn't realize for I think almost a year, and I was getting hit with these charges by the Chase account, and I didn't realize that until I realized that my account balance was actually going down because I didn't really use it so much. Something that you just don't have to worry about with Capital One, and there's really nothing much else to say about that except for the fact that there are no fees, and there's also no overdraft fee, which you shouldn't be doing anyway, but something that a lot of banks otherwise do not offer. Probably the second biggest thing that I've noticed over the years is that from trying different direct deposits with having my W-2 employer, also the Army paychecks coming in, when I set it up with different bank accounts, the Capital One direct deposit is the quickest out of all of them. This is anecdotal experience, I understand. It has something to do with how they do the magic in the back end, but and that's just, again, my personal experience with that. And I think it's pretty great if you want to get paid a little bit earlier. I don't know how Capital One makes it work, but that hasn't been the case when I had it set up with like Bank of America and Discover previously, which now Discover is becoming part of Capital One, but that's a separate topic. The third biggest thing I would say is the speed of transfers. So speed of transfer I'm talking about between accounts is instant. I think that should be the standard for any bank accounts, but for certain cases I've used in the past with other banks I won't name, it hasn't been that way. And with Capital One, it's always instant. If I transfer from my checking to savings, savings to checking, vice versa. Sometimes I'm talking about even transferring money from, let's say, Robinhood, which is a third party. It's external to Capital One. That transfer is supposed to take between 3 to 5 business days, but I will say it has never taken 5 business days, and it usually hits within a day or two at max. So I'm talking about either withdrawing money from my Capital One checking account to then invest and put into my portfolio in Robinhood, or moving the money from my Robinhood spending account into Capital One has always been very quick. Should mention also that Zelle is like built into Capital One, and I think that's kind of like, it's like a Venmo adjacent or Cash App kind of thing where you can transfer money into another person's account, and that is also, in my experience, instant as long as it's under a certain dollar limit. The next thing I want to chat about is the Capital One savings account like interest rates. So the annual percentage rate that you make as a yield on your savings account. So generally it is pretty good. Right now it's not the highest out there in the market, but just because Capital One has not done me dirty in any way in the past, I'm just going to leave it, and because I don't care about a 0.1% kind of difference. But compared to some of the competitors, like Chase's standard account, it's like 0.01% interest. So you are basically losing money effectively by having it parked in that account. Right now, as of making this video, I want to say it's between 3.4 and 3.5% as an interest rate that you're getting on as a return, basically, when having the money parked in that account. The only thing higher that I have in one of my accounts right now is the Robinhood spending account, because I have Robinhood Gold, which I have to pay for, of course, which is $5 a month. And it's, I think, like 3.75%. But it's a very marginal difference, and Capital One Savings usually has a very good savings rate, or interest rate for the savings account. Traditionally, it has been one of the highest, if not the highest, among like major banks that I'd be like comfortable with parking my money for a longer period of time. The next thing I should mention is the user interface and user experience generally is very good with Capital One. I think for me, I'm a product manager, I work in tech, and so the user experience is obviously very important to me because that's something I literally work on at my job. But it's very easy to use, things are intuitive, and you also don't get like ads, or like, not ads, but like an internal upsell like you do sometimes with Chase or like Amex. The app interface is very simple. It's the same on the desktop application. I think they just have basically the same user interface for the most part, and no distractions. I would say that the ecosystem of Capital One is no doubt pretty solid because of course I have the Venture X, and so I can use that as my credit card account that's part of everything I can see all at once in all my accounts in Capital One's website. I don't have to tab over or like find it in a different type of portal. It's all together, and it's very seamless for me to do things within the Capital One app or on the website. The next one I have to say is kind of a big one, and I probably should put this earlier in the video, but to me, having Capital One cafes is huge. When we talk about physical locations, frankly, these days I really don't think people use cash that much, but if you do, and you need to take cash out, Capital One not only has Capital One cafes in places where they don't necessarily have bank branches, but they also have a partner network of over, I think, like 70,000 branches, rather not branches, ATMs, where basically every CVS or Walgreens that has an ATM, you go on the Capital One app, you can see on the list there that all the Allpoint ATMs and another network are included in what you can actually get your cash out of your Capital One account by using your debit card with no fees. I would say, maybe 10 years ago, that wasn't the case when they didn't have this huge network, and so I wouldn't necessarily want to have Capital One if I was, like, let's say, on the West Coast, but I literally live on the West Coast right now. In San Diego, for example, at the UTC, there is a Capital One cafe, and they always have an ATM with people that can help you as well in the Capital One cafes. But in addition to that, you also have the network of ATMs that are kind of everywhere. So you don't have to worry about there not being a Capital One bank branch. I think that's honestly a thing of the past for consumer banking if you're doing basic transactions, right? The majority of people are not dealing with like Capital One home loans and auto loans and things like that on a daily basis, right? Traditionally, as a customer, I'm mostly focused on day-to-day transactions. If I need to take out some cash, I can do that fee-free. I think Capital One has always been pretty good about like maybe trying to predict the next thing or making it happen. And that in itself, the Capital One cafes, I think are pretty cool in that you never just go and hang out in a bank branch. That doesn't make any sense. You're not allowed to do that, right? But Capital One cafes are a place you can actually order coffee, you can get a snack, you can sit down and work, you get free Wi-Fi. It's open to the public actually. And from my knowledge and research of Capital One cafes, they're always in what I would consider like good areas. So they're in kind of a spot where there's usually kind of a shopping, urban kind of complex metropolitan area like around it. But I think it's just another benefit of having Capital One as a bank account. You don't have to have a Capital One bank account though to go to a Capital One cafe. I should caveat with that. The last thing I'll say is just around the customer service and like the trust aspect for Capital One. I think I would trust Capital One to both park my money there, but also just be able to handle my concerns as a customer if I have them in terms of banking products as a consumer. The same cannot be said with a huge bank like maybe like Chase or like an Amex. First of all, Amex, they don't really do banking. That's like an afterthought compared to their credit products. At least in my experience as a consumer, right? For Capital One, it's core to their platform, what they do, right? And I feel like when I talk to a Capital One person on customer service or go to a Capital One cafe or at a branch, like the employees don't hate their lives. Like if I go to like a Chase or like a Bank of America, they could be like in the hood where I wouldn't want to go anyway to go to the bank branch, or just like a totally rundown like building, and like it just is not giving. This is where I want to go bank at. But Capital One somehow has figured that out. At least in my opinion, it seems like they've got a pretty good setup where the bank branches are in good locations for the most part. In my experience, they've always been clean. Everything works. ATMs work, and the people that work there, friendly, good customer service. That's all I really care about. It's supposed to be good. It's supposed to be normal interactions at a bank, right? And it does everything I need it to do. That's all to say that originally I was going to do like a comparison video between maybe like Amex, Chase, and Capital One and some of the other major bank branches, or rather banking institutions, just for consumer banking. And again, I just don't really have anything to say with like positives for like an Amex or like a Chase because they're long-standing established institutions for sure. But compared to Capital One, it's just no comparison with like a core banking product. And this is my personal opinion. This is not, again, not sponsored or anything. It's almost been like 10 years I've only used Capital One. So this is kind of a long time coming that I should have made this video a little bit sooner. But for those of you that care, I think Capital One is definitely a safe bet and the banking institution of choice I'm going to be using for years to come. So if If you guys have any other opinions, let me know in the comment section below, and feel free to have that discussion. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.